Hi, everybody. My name is Charles Chiang. Today I'm going to be presenting MetricMate, an interactive tool for generating evaluation criteria for LLM-as-a-Judge workflows. I'm from the University of Notre Dame, and this was done in collaboration with the Notre Dame IBM Tech Ethics Lab. So just a quick overview of content. We're going to discuss what exactly is LLM-as-a-Judge, as well as the background and the challenges, as well as some motivating previous work. Then I'll jump into the formative need finding study that we created, as well as a quick walkthrough of our MetricMate system, which you can also find the demo in the back right corner. Then I'll briefly touch on some user study and some next steps. So what is LLM-as-a-Judge? Essentially, you take a large language model and you ask it to evaluate some input on some criteria and respond, is it A or is it B? So the specific scenario we're looking at is using LLM-as-a-Judge to evaluate another LLM's responses in a sort of like meta, like prompting sort of situation. And so you would take an LLM response from a chatbot and pass it in as input to the LLM-as-a-Judge and ask it to say, maybe, is this response quote unquote awesome, yes or no? And then ideally, the LLM-as-a-Judge would respond, is it awesome or if it's not awesome? So there are some great strengths for using LLM-as-a-Judge, namely that it's very flexible and you can cut out the human, which reduces the need for like human labor and costs associated with that, as well as being able to process a large amount of text in a nuances of human judgment. They also can't really explain their thought process as well as humans might be able to. And then finally, the evaluation criteria that the LLM judge uses to evaluate an input is a source of additional friction. Users usually struggle to formulate and articulate nuanced and comprehensive evaluation criteria. And that's the crux of the problem that we're focusing on today. So there are two main issues with the evaluation criteria process. One is that criteria are usually very subjective and ambiguous. What really does make a response awesome? I might have a different answer from someone else. And also, again, users may not always generate a comprehensive list of criteria. We can't account for all the edge cases for responses that are awesome and not. Essentially, we can sort of view this as an alignment problem. I, as a human, know what I think makes a response awesome, and that's based off of my personal experiences and my values. I then want to impart those values onto some aligned model and have that model understand the same way that I do what makes a response great. With that in mind, we have to work within the model capabilities as well as within specific environments and tasks, because all tasks are not made equal. So motivating prior work includes ChainForge and eval-LM. These systems are designed to help users. Well, this is in the chatbot prompting space, but they're designed to allow users to evaluate different chatbots based on some criteria. And while they do that really well, they don't, unfortunately, help users formulate and iterate on the criteria evaluation themselves. They just allow the users to test these criteria. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out, how do people really create these evaluation criteria? And further, how can we support them in this process? And so to answer those questions, we conducted a formative study. We recruited participants, 6 participants, both PhD students and software engineers, with different amounts of experience working with and evaluating LLMs, and asked them to participate in a contextual inquiry, where we asked them to look at some data from a chatbot and essentially create evaluation criteria for it. Then we asked them a bunch of questions and analyzed the data. The data set that we used was that of a patient intake, a chatbot. What we did was we took a data set of simulated patient statements and then passed them to a chatbot to generate some response. And then this created like a list of around 50 data points that we then showed to participants and asked them to evaluate. The key findings from this formative study were that, like we hypothesized, participants' evaluations are very subjective. Everybody has their own idea of what a chatbot should look like and how it should act. And everybody started with the same exact data points, but ended with a very different list of criteria. Participants also struggled to articulate why certain outputs were poor, even though they could easily identify that these outputs were poor. The why of it matters as well, especially in alignment. Finally, thirdly, as prior research has mentioned, criteria, definition, validation is a very dynamic process. There is some sort of bidirectional alignment where as we look at more data, as users look at more data, they change their criteria due to what the data tells them and how the model understands their data. Also, criteria weighting, there are some trade-offs between criteria, especially when it comes to things like safety versus more stylistic choices. So we then transformed these insights into design goals, where we want to integrate users' existing domain knowledge with data-driven insights from the evaluation process. We also want to create a workflow that's structured and helps users more explicitly define criteria, as well as support iteration in real time. And finally, we want to make trade-offs between criteria visible to help users understand and change defined criteria. So this is what MetricMate looks like. On the right-hand side, we can see all of our data points, both the inputs and the outputs. And then on the left side, we have a panel where we add our criteria. And I'm just going to walk through this really quick. But essentially, when you click on the add button for criteria, you can add whatever criteria you want. For example, the email response should be friendly. And then if you press that break it down button, we ask the system to generate some criteria, some assertions, which are essentially a higher granularity for criteria. So assertions should be very binary and much less subjective. So does this email contain a greeting that includes the student's name? This is a very binary assertion. And these assertions are designed to sort of represent all of the things that would fulfill the criteria. In this case, what is a friendly response? We can further break down the assertions into at specific data points and seeing how the model understands how these assertions work. So on different data points, do they pass or do they fail? This sort of three-tiered levels of abstraction helps users on the domain side at the very high level, where we can sort of create a natural language criteria level, as well as on the very fine granularity side, lower abstraction level, where we can look at data and see how the model operates. Our second main feature is the data stage, where we can drag and drop specific data points into groups, and then ask the system to come up with a criteria that either describes the group or highlights contrasts between two different groups. And we do this by asking the system to essentially look at all the data points in one group and say, what makes these data points different from the other group? Finally, we also allow users to look at trade-offs. So when you press run, you can see we have the LLM-as-a-Judge evaluate all of our criteria and all of our assertions for each and every single data point. And then when we see, we show an aggregated view of each criteria, that also when you hover over it, you can see the passes and the fails for each assertions as well. We also show a radar plot we also show a radar plot to show some of the trade-offs between criterias. Finally, we did conduct a user study that we weren't able to include in the paper for this workshop, but you can talk to me more about it later at the poster session. And so the next steps are we want to look at sort of multi-stakeholder evaluation, so we're including both domain experts as well as lay users, and then potentially agent evaluations, looking at more agentic workflows rather than LLM-as-a-Judge. Thank you.